welcome to the audience, everyone who's out there. We're going to take a good little deep dive into an important series of records in our collection. And if you think about it, the employees of the government, the Public Service Board was a major employer over a very long period. We have here a snapshot of their records over 50 years. And we're going to have a look at what they present, why they present, and the do's and the how-tos on the whole process. So first, in the spirit of reconciliation, Museums of History New South Wales acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Oops, that doesn't look like good OH&S, does it? I just thought I'd show you this. It's a photograph from the government printer series for the Public Service Board. And for those of you who are of the younger generation, you know, there's no computer there. It's all, and the phone actually has a cord. So that's real old school stuff. So let's dive into the records that we're here to talk about. The Public Service Board. Now I'm going to show you the agency description page, and it's always a really interesting place to start a search because our agency pages are very interesting in terms of consolidating a lot of information into a small space that can be relevant to any sort of research. I'll take the hard work out of it for you, but I just like to advertise this is always a good thing to do whenever you're doing something, to understand why did they create records and what will I hope to find in those records. I'll show you what I mean. I'll show you what it means straight away. Now, it tells us the Public Service Board was established to replace the Civil Service Board. And the function was, I'm summarising for the sake of keeping it a short webinar, the function was to grade officers and classify their work, conduct inquiries and arrange examinations. So right there, we have a bit of a clue what the Public Service Board's role was in relation to these records and what we can probably expect to see on those records. So we take a look at the Public Service Act. The Public Service Act, in a sense, updated the previous work that had been done to create the board, but emphasised the role of the board very clearly. Now, without diving into the reading, I'm just showing you the power of looking at the Creating Act. It says here they were to grade officers and classify work, and that they would determine the salaries, fees, allowances, and payable to officers. So it's really a function of their role as the employer in terms of payment of increments and of money and allowances and so forth. And we'll see a little bit of everything I've just described as well. A little bit further into the Act, we see this one. There also is a requirement that for the promotions and retirements to be gazetted. So that's interesting because you will see mention of gazettings of information on the cards themselves. This is the reason it's in the Act, and obviously you can follow that through, and I will show you. Now, what's one thing that can trip people up when it comes to the Public Service Board cards is that the Public Service Board was legislated to track these agencies. And what they did shortly before this Act is they started to create the possibility of agencies operating but not being called part of the public service. An example of which would perhaps be Health, who's not on this list. I believe one of the Maritime Service Boards was not involved and so forth. So if you find that you don't find someone in the cards, it is very possibly that they weren't part of the Public Service Board's jurisdiction, and as a result, they're not really public servants. What they would be termed as is government employees. Now, I think I was the one who did the government employees webinar some time ago. That webinar shows you the broad scope of other sorts of records we have, and I do recommend it if you want to go further than today's topic. Okay, now this is the series that we're looking at, and it doesn't have a strong series description, but that's okay, because I'm going to show you everything you need to know. And here's an example of a card. But what I thought I would show you first is that it has designation, so what was their role in the organisation, their salary at that time, also their basic wage. I didn't tag that, but it's there as well, and their allowances. So can you see where I'm coming from? These cards are strictly about the payment and the responsibility to record the payment to workers, to record their promotions, to make sure they get their increments fairly and so forth. So it's very much about the salaries and wages. And so you get, but having said that, you're going to get a lot of information from that kind of record. But when you start seeing the theme, it all comes from the Act. And just to go a little bit old school for a little moment here, there's 135 boxes, and this is listings that we would have used traditionally to find you the right box to look at your card. As of today, you don't need to. You can find them by name in our collection, but they are actually organised alphabetically, which makes it wonderful for individuals to find records. So now we'll focus on the finding. How do you find an employee history card? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to explain it to you carefully. The first option is just search by name. But what you will find if you just search by name is you will get other results, and so you will need to tweak results as well. And I'll show you how to do that if you haven't already. It's very simple. Once you know, you know. Now, if you look at John Smith's result, which, yes, I chose John Smith because it would be very messy in terms of lots of records, you'll notice if we look down the list, it's all criminal records in the convict era. So that's probably a very active convict or a number of different convicts with the same name, which is not useful to us. So what you do is you use the tweak your results page. Now, the more experience you get with our systems, the better you get at this, but the basics are very straightforward. We go up page and look through all the different types of records, and we find the one that we're interested in. In this case, it's NRS 12395, and that's the series we want. If we click it, there are 6 John Smiths who were employed by the board. And there they are. We can have a look at their cards. And so the secret is to know what you're looking for. And a second thing here is something I always teach to people in the reading room, and also when I've traveled and done talks, is always record your NRS, because it stands for New South Wales Records Series. It's like a key to a lock. If you write down the NRS when you're researching something, you will never ever have a problem working out what you were doing. And if you show it to an archivist in the reading room, well, I looked at one NRS 12395, in a couple of taps, they will know exactly what you did. And it's a very simple way to record what you're doing. And if you want to publish a book or something, it'll lead to a citation as well. So now let's dive into the cards themselves. John Smith Hodgkinson is just picked completely at random. We'll search too, but this time we'll put John Smith Hodgkinson and the series. Now, if you remember what I was emphasizing, is that series like the key to a lock. Once you have a series number, you should be using it in terms of searches, because it eliminates everything that is irrelevant to your search. So I do recommend have a high awareness of the series that you're looking for when you're doing searches if you can, and over time you will build it up. Someone like myself and my colleagues who work in the reading room, we've memorized all the most common ones, and we could rattle them off because we see them so often. But in your case, write them down, because as you go along, you will build up experience of your own and be able to help your friends. So as you can see, because we went to just the series and the name, there is only one person that fits that criteria, which makes it a very easy search once you get into it. It always also works with the container number, but it's not necessary anymore because they're all in the system but by their name. So anything that's in that description is a good search tool. In this case, series and name. So we'll click on it now, because we're now diving into the what do we get out of all of this phase. And this is what we call the item page. Now, the item page has 2 thumbnails there. And yes, you can click on the thumbnails to bring up the item. And what can we learn from the card? Now we're getting to the nitty gritty. Remember, I warned you, it's got a lot to do with their employment status. First thing on the top is the serial number. Now, a little secret, the first 2 numbers on there is the year of employment. So this person was employed in 1965. It has any degrees, obviously Christian name and surname. It gives you the department they were working for and when they were born. It gives you employment date. In the research I did for today's talk, it doesn't always record it there, but it often does. So it's a bit hit and miss. It gives you the division they were working in and whether they are permanent or temporary, which is the way the public service thinks, and certainly it did in this era. So as you can see on the right-hand side, my little notes that I've made from just the top strip, I've already got a lot of details about this man. I know that he was employed when he was 58. Right there, that's unusual. He was employed in the General Division of Public Works. and he was temporary at the beginning. So let's go a little bit deeper. Now, unfortunately, we don't have these file numbers. So the first thing I did when I was preparing this talk is I went through our records and looked at things that may lead to that being the relevant number, and unfortunately, it doesn't appear to be in the archives, so we can't follow that lead. But we have plenty of information anyway. Over here on the right-hand side, we have something that generates a lot of interest in questions when judging by emails that I receive. Section 44. When you see something like Section 44, they are referring to the Act that created this position and this record as well. In this case, it's the Public Service Act of 1902, and it's very easy to do. If you want to go a little bit further and say, okay, well, what is Section 44? You just go for a search on legislation.newsouthwales.gov.au, and Section 44 is temporary officers. So it is just basically saying he was a temporary officer. I won't go further into the details. That's a bit of fun you can have on your own should you want to go further with that. We now know that he was an estimator. I had to Google what an estimator is, but essentially they're estimating costs and benefits and so forth. I think we have actuaries now. It seems like a very similar thing. Probation period extended. So see how it's really keeping track of what status he has in the public service, what his level of employment is. Over here is an estimator for public works, and we've got his salary, and he's fully employed here. So I imagine he might have been made permanent around this time. Actually, I take that back. If he was made permanent, they would have crossed out temporary at the top and made him permanent. So that must mean he was full-time. And then his salary doubles over time. And over here, that word there that it looks a little smudged and a little hard to interpret. I'm very confident it stands for increment. Very common in Australian society, isn't it, that we shorten things down. In terms of words and language, we have John or we like shortening things down, and you will see that in public service records as well. In this case, it's increment, and he's gone from second year to third year max. And that, every time I've seen increment, it's shortened to that kind of a thing there. So that's something to watch out for too. I do encourage, if ever you have curiosity over these section things, go to legislation.nsw.gov.au. It's nowhere near as scary as it sounds. And if they give a section name like 44, number, excuse me, it's very simple. All you've got to do is be careful to search as made, because the website does track what are current bills and what are bills that have been repealed. Your interest is as made, which is just the bill by the bill name and the year. It's how you find it, and you search by either year or the name of the act. My personal searches are always to go to the year, look at the list, and find the act. It's just very simple, very simple. And the reading thereof, well, they do tend to go on in terms of a lot of information, but I've read the whole of the Public Service Act just recently, getting ready for today, and frankly, it's a fairly easy read, and it gives you all the details. So now, a lot of people will want to know, how do you download a card? So we'll go there, we'll cover that aspect of this. I'm choosing a different card because I'm trying to build up your experience. Kevin Cyril Ballard. We'll click on the card thumbnail, and it brings us through to this page, which is how the cards are displayed. Now you've got some tools here, so it's appropriate that I show you what they do. Up here is option to show extra pages. It places two thumbnails down the bottom. I can click the second page. In this case, it's blank, but sometimes it's not. Going back to the first page for what we're doing. And if you want to save it, now is a good time. You can just right click with your mouse and choose Save As. Now I've noticed that each screen that I'm showing you now, that I'm giving you all your options, they all save at the same resolution, so that's not an issue. You will get a high resolution copy saving now, or even if it's bigger in the screen. Over here on the right, you can expand the image out to the full screen, makes it a bit easier to see. That one pops it out into a new browser, and this one pops it out in this browser. The difference is so minor, I don't think it matters. Choose either one that you prefer. And if you save now, it comes out at the same resolution, so there's no difference to before. You can save at any time using that technique, right click. So now let's take a closer look. And what I find fascinating, it's Kevin Cyril Ballard, is it's this, you would see this as a working document. What you and I and us and everyone would do today if we wanted to keep a record of something, and I'm sure our employers, is that when something becomes irrelevant, they would delete it in the database and then just update the database. They might even have a menu to pick it. And that's the modern way of handling data. But when we go old school, and we're going old school, they didn't do that because they didn't have computers. And so if they went from stamp duties to public works, they would have to cross out stamp duties and then write public works, which proves to me this document is not about keeping the history of the person, it is about the current status as time goes on. It does record the history, but its purpose is current. They want to know what his role and status is now, and how long has he been in the public service and so forth. Perhaps they want to know his experience in case he, working out if he should be promoted or something else. But those crossings out are a proof that they're most interested in the current status of this person. We know that he starts in 1960, we know that he's moved to a new division, and we know that he's had 3 different roles over time, which you can see there for yourselves. We also know that it's been gazetted 3 times. Now, for those of you who don't have a lot of research experience at this current time, you're going to love Trove, because once you go to Trove, I'll show you in a moment, started as a temporary, he became first aid officer, made it permanent. He confirmed in the Gazette in 1961. Now, it's quite easy on Trove. Trove is the National Library of Australia's website, and essentially it condenses a lot of different resources. If you want to find a book, you would go to Trove. If you want to find a photograph that's not from our recollection, the government, you would go to Trove. But in the case of what we're using Trove for now, you would go to newspapers and gazettes because you're looking through the government gazette. What's beautiful is it's indexed by name. You can search by name. It does work. It supports that. And as you can see in the bottom corner there, I found our man on the 1st of the 4th, 1961, was made a stamper on probation. So you could go from finding this person on Trove to then looking for them on our website very, very easily. And I'm sure some of you at least have started here already. So we go back, he's been appointed to State Government Office Block Public Works, he's appointed House Officer, pay increase. I'm not sure what a House Officer is, that's a curious term to me. Maybe perhaps in the comments we might have someone out there who knows. I chose a second one now, a female, Margaret Ann Boyling. Nay Sim, she gets married. One of the things that's hidden in the 1902 Public Service Act is any female whose husband is also in the public service is required to resign on getting married. So I don't know in this case, except there's no mention at the bottom of resigning, so I don't know in this case. But until that act was repealed in 1968, as a matter of fact, when our series records stop, and would become effective in 1969, the year after. One of the milestones of equal pay and equal rights, I would imagine. She started as temporary and made permanent. Yeah, you can see the crossings out again. I don't need to harp. Lands to Public Works. Started as a tracer at Lords. A lot of these jobs are gone now. I don't know about tracer. I chose not a great time to say that, but the jobs change over time and also roles can come and go. I remember when I first started work in the late 80s, they were typists in different organizations. I don't know if there are any left because I do my own typing. And yeah, that's a role that's now not needed anymore. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding at the current time. Transfer to photogrammatic division, incremental pay increases, and it gives you the amounts, goes up by about 1/8. Promoted to grade 1 tracer at Public Works, so she's moved to division, but doing the same work, gazetted as well, by the way. And she got married. Now, I've already explained this. Marriage was in the Act that if your husband was in the public service, you'd be required to resign. So they would have the reasons for that being in the legislation in 1902, but by 1969 it was considered obsolete. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't disparage this man's heritage. You can see he's considered that the positioning of the phone might be better on the table, and the cord is very safely being operated now. And for you young ones out there, there's a desk and someone hard at work where there's no computer, and that's what we used to use, which is sheets of paper and also cards, which are not on the table at the moment. So we'll finish with this one. This is just a little bit of light relief at the end of the talk. Same things can be made, points can be made, but I'm not going to repeat myself to keep it a short talk. He works for Department of Education, Agriculture and Education. He is a messenger, which is important in Central Admin, Branch Agriculture. He transfers to Vice H. Watts. He became a car driver at Education, and then he was transferred officially. But this is the interesting thing. He has a clothing allowance, and he has another clothing allowance, and he has another clothing allowance, and then he has an increased clothing allowance. And I find that intriguing. As a person who's never had a clothing allowance, that sounds like a really good treat, a perk of the job. It also makes me curious about what did he actually do. So he must have had a role where he was front-facing with the either the internal public service or external. I'm thinking internal, but I'll leave those questions for you. That was just a bit of fun at the end. The man who had increased clothing allowance. Which brings us to the end of the webinar. Hope you enjoyed. I hope it answered all your questions even before we open up for some more. But I enjoyed putting it together for you, and I hope this little deep dive in the topic is helpful for your research.